Joining us now for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning, Adefemi.
Good morning, Dr. Reuben.
We don't review.
I won't. This is morning television. It is. Yeah. Good morning, Ayo.
Good morning. It's sight for sore eyes, Adefemi.
Oh, thank you so much. And good morning, Rufai. I hope you guys had a great weekend. Let me tell you what is happening around the world. Now, we did discuss this story last week, but the latest update in the political drama happening in Turkey is that Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu, the main rival to Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, has been formally arrested and charged with corruption. Now, police used pepper spray on protesters who were demonstrating in support of İmamoğlu, who was due to be selected as the Republican People's Party, in Turkish is referred to as the CHP, for their 2028 presidential nominee in a vote that was due to happen on Sunday. Now, İmamoğlu has criticized his arrest as a black stain on Turkey's democracy. Moving on to Canada, and its new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, has dissolved Parliament and triggered a snap election which will be held on the 28th of April. The election had to be held by October 20th, but experts say that Carney is hoping that an early vote will benefit his Liberal Party, which is riding a wave of momentum following his emergence as the party's leader. Now, that party, which has been in government since 2015 even, has seen a surge in support since Trudeau's January announcement that he planned to step down amid repeated threats from Trump. Now, Canadian domestic issues like cost of living, housing and immigration will still be important when it comes to this election, but definitely when it comes to dealing with hostilities from Canada's neighbour, the United States. Pierre Poilievre, or is it Poilievre? Poilievre. The Conservative leader says a Conservative government would take a respectful and firm approach to dealing with Donald Trump. So it'll be very interesting to see what the Canadian people choose. Now, some highlight is that 88-year-old Pope Francis has been released from hospital in Rome. He did greet crowds for the first time since his hospitalization on the 14th of February. Now, he did suffer from a serious bout of pneumonia and was seen to be struggling to breathe during his appearance. Doctors did say that the pontiff will need 2 months of rest at the Vatican, but many people were still extending their well wishes to the Pope. And on the African continent, Ibrahim Rasool, who is the South African ambassador who was expelled from the United States and declared persona non grata by the Trump administration, was welcomed home onto Cape Town on Sunday by hundreds of supporters who sang songs praising him. Now, Rasool was expelled for comments he made on a webinar that included him saying that the Make America Great Again movement was partly a response to a supremacist instinct. Now, in response, the United States removed his diplomatic immunities and privileges and gave him until this Friday just gone to leave the country, which he obviously did, arriving in South Africa on Sunday. Though he said that he would wear his persona non grata status as a badge of dignity, he also said that it was important for South Africa to fix its relationship with the United States.
Rasool is a true hero, is a true patriot. When I think of people like Rasool, I think of people like John Roger, who wrote the Roger Report, which was the report of the atrocities by Hitler Germany. He was one of the first lawyers that was investigating the case and took those people to court, the likes of Verick and Co., that perpetrated Nazism on American soil. And he wrote an extensive book called the Roger Report. If you read the Roger Report, you see everything Trump is doing today is a playbook for what happened back in the days in the 1930s. Real quickly to Turkey, yes, he's fighting his political opponent, pretty much akin to sort of like the recall that is going on here. That's what is happening with Natasha, So Senator Natasha Akpoti and all of that, but that's local issue. But in Turkey, he doesn't want him to roll. Yesterday was the day he was supposed to be put down, to be able to run in the election. Yes. He's been able to stop that. He said, terrorist link, he's talked about corruption and all that, but the people are pushing, let's see how all of this pan out in Turkey. Real quickly to the next.
We had the Pope, we had South Africa, and we had our lead story was Turkey, which was already talked about. So it's the Pope. Canada.
It could backfire what Mark Carney has done. Because yes, on the polls, despite the fact that there's a bump, they've closed the gap, I think, to a 3 or 4 percentage point difference. The Conservatives are still in the lead. Those local issues, Conservatives still hold a strong point. One of the first things Mark Carney did quickly was to pull out that contentious carbon tax. But let's see how the people will still vote. Poilievre has still been gunning for the fact that the economy was not working under him. Probably the vote might sway, and the bump the Conservatives are having is because, he might be the first one to stand up against Trump. Trump has not mentioned, Carney in anything. He's a forthright banker across the aisle and all of that. But let's see how that pans out. It might be a gamble in the end, And for the Pope, welcome back, Father.
Definitely. Yeah, welcome back. But interesting, so many things. But this morning, let me talk about Turkey and Canada if I have some time. With Turkey, we discussed this last week with regards to the protest that has started as a result of the president seeming to want to silence his main opposition in the person of Ekrem İmamoğlu. Now, what's now happened is that charges have been brought up and they have put him in pre-detention. But a number of things, we can't say this only happens in Africa any longer, where in trying to silence the opposition, you then find ways to keep him away from the elections. Another thing that's happened is that Istanbul University has withdrawn his diploma as a result of this arrest. Now, this is a major stumbling block because for you to be a presidential candidate in Turkey, you have to have at least a university degree. So if they're saying they've withdrawn his diploma, it means that he doesn't even qualify. He's also been suspended as mayor of Istanbul, which is the biggest or most popular city in Turkey. And we had talked about how Istanbul had voted against President Erdogan's party in the last elections in a, surprising and almost humiliating defeat, since Erdogan himself grew up and was raised and lived, a substantial part of his life in Istanbul, in Turkey. So the tens of thousands of people have come out to protest. They're saying that this is the only formidable opposition to Erdogan at the time. He's the sole nominated presidential candidate of the opposition, Republican People's Party, CHP. He's now been locked up. Let's see if international embarrassment, if the fact that investors will lose faith in coming into a volatile environment like Turkey would tilt in his favor and make Erdogan make some political sense in this matter. I think it's very tricky to begin to find out what they've described as trumped-up charges, not without a lot of evidence against your opponent. Correct. Just in the nick of time. It happens in many places, and we've seen a lot of leaders use this as a weapon. Even in the United States of America, recall that President Trump had said that those charges were politically motivated, even though he was convicted in court and they had enough evidence to try him. But we've seen this happen across, from Africa to the United States of America, now to Turkey. Now, with regards to Canada, a lot of things up. I think it's going to be a very exciting race to the polls that has now been called by Carney. Carney is 60 years old, while his main opposition, Poilievre, is 45. He's significantly younger. However, he has more political experience than Carney. In fact, Carney is the first prime minister currently that was not elected to parliament, first of all. But because of the state of the economy of Canada, he's a well-respected banker. We talked about his pedigree already, and he seems to be able to fix the prevailing economic issues in Canada. But another thing is, like you talked about, how Trump will play a huge effect on how the people vote, perhaps, because it's said that Poilievre and the Conservatives are quite in support, or at least would be almost like his puppets, whilst Liberals will stand against Trump and have been very determined about that. So we'll see how the Canadians will vote in a few weeks' time.
Okay, what are the key editorial points, if we may editorialize on this subject? Let me start with Turkey. Erdogan has been, president of Turkey for 22 years.
Yes.
In the last mayoral elections, he lost woefully. The party, the Republican People's Party, CHP, won most of the seats. And also you now had Ekrem İmamoğlu emerging as a major rival to President Erdogan. The next election is not due until 2028, but the opposition is calling for, early election. And so İmamoğlu has become the target of, Erdogan's authoritarianism. When last we discussed this matter, I listed some of the allegations against him. But the charges that you talked about, he's been charged for embezzlement, bribery, corruption, terrorism, and all of that. What you left out is the fact that yesterday, or over the weekend, a Turkish court decided to imprison him. He's now in jail, severe prison, as we speak. But it was also yesterday, Sunday, that the party, the Republican People's Party, decided to hold votes. 15 million members of the party showed up. 13 million non-members of the party in what was called solidarity vote also showed up. And they all voted for Ekrem Imamoglu. And it was on the basis of that that the chairman of the party is now saying there should be early elections, that Erdogan must go. 300 protesters were detained. On Saturday, the government decided to extend the curfew or the ban on street gatherings, they called it, by 4 days. But the protesters came out, and that was why they went after them. 6 out of 7 mayors in Greater Istanbul are also in detention as we speak. So, but the European community has condemned this. The international community should also join the voice to say we condemn what is happening in Turkey, because it looks too African to be believable. Now, as for Pope, well, we say "Viva il Papa," Papa, as they say in Italian language. Yeah, first time he was seen after being released from the hospital, the Gemelli Hospital in Rome. And, he addressed the people, but he did a good thing by recognizing Victoria.
Yes, we see her at the end of this clip.
Victoria Mancuso.
Yes.
79-year-old, who had visited him every day in hospital. But, the Pope has been told to take 2 months rest. His medical advisor, his physician, has also said this is the advice that he has been given. He thanked the woman who was there. He thanked everybody who showed concern about him. He also visited the Basilica of St. Mary Major, to which he is devoted, which he visits, on a regular basis. When we saw him, he was not on oxygen support, but we were told that he will need 2 months to rest. But he has other engagements. On April 8th, he had been scheduled to meet with Britain's King Charles, and also on April 20, he is expected to lead Easter celebrations. But the Vatican has not given us, statements about whether he will be there or not.
Okay.
I wanted to comment on just one other subject.
Just a second. Let us take the papers and then we'll come back to you, just because I can imagine we are running out of time. Let's take the papers and then I'll come back to you for your last comments before we end the segment. Moving on to papers this morning, let's start with the front page of This State. This State does lead with comments from Senator Adolphus Wabara, who is, of course, the chairman of the People's Democratic Party's Board of Trustees. He says that the declaration of a state of assembly in Rivers is an assault on Nigeria's democracy. This is, of course, as the Nigerian Bar Association condemned the National Assembly's ratification of this state of emergency rule through voice votes. Now, This State's picture headline has editor-in-chief and chairman of Arise Media Group, Prince Nduka Obagbena, alongside the spokesman for the U.S. Department of State, Julie McKay, in the middle. And on the far left, you have Temitayo Famutimi, who is the media and communications advisor at the U.S. Embassy here in Nigeria. Also on This Day's front page is the unveiling of a $15 million fund in support of 300 African entrepreneurs. On the back of This Day this morning, we also have a very interesting back page article written by Bayo Ononuga, who talks about essentially what Rivers would be like had President Tinubu not called this state of emergency, how it would be detrimental for Simi Fubara himself and for the people of Rivers had the president not intervened. So a very interesting read there. Moving on to the New Telegraph, and the New Telegraph leads with suspended Rivers State Governor Sim Fubara making his first appearance in Port Harcourt since his suspension. Alongside other politicians, elders and stakeholders, he attended a Thanksgiving service at Salvation Ministry headquarters in the state capital. The Punch, however, leads with marketers and their fear of a price hike looming after the federal government suspended sale to the Dangote refinery. Now, following the Dangote Petroleum Refinery suspension of the sale of petroleum products in Naira, some filling stations have also started stockpiling petrol, a move that Ipman has condemned. The federal government and Dangote refinery are due to resume talks today. Now, to the Tribune picks up on the prospect of looming job losses as operations at the Apapa port barge are on a steady decline. And the Guardian leads with a look at the impact of USAID or USAID withdrawal. Now, they talk about drug shortages, meaning that facilities are essentially rationing antiretroviral medications. To UK papers now, if we take a look at the UK Guardian, Prime Minister Keir Starmer has been warned against appeasing Donald Trump as he considers reducing a major tax for US tech companies while cutting disability benefits and public sector jobs. And those public sector cuts take the front page of the Daily Mail this morning as Chancellor Rachel Reeves is set to announce the funding cuts that could cause 10,000 civil servant job losses. Dr. Bati, I did interrupt you there. I know you had some thoughts that you wanted to come on to and share.
Very quickly. I wanted to talk about one, Ibrahim Rasool, Article 9 of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, 1961, does not expect the United States to give any explanation. The first line under Article 9 says, you can without even any explanation. However, it's good news that Rasool, received a hero's welcome.
Okay.
But those people who welcomed him, they were saying, free Palestine, free Palestine. But it's also good that he remained the diplomat that he is, saying that, look, we have to fix our relationship with the U.S. and that South Africa going to the ICJ is not a crime to defend the Palestinians in Gaza. Number two, Mr. Bayo Ononuga has written an article, back page of the Guardian today. Oh, I said the Guardian. Of this day. Our very own. Yeah, don't worry. Nostalgia. To say, imagine a river state without a state of emergency. Yes. Well, his arguments, well-reasoned, but the caveat to add is that everybody is telling the president to reverse his position on rivers, as long as in his own estimation, he thinks that the situation is, has stabilized, not for him to say he can do something that's unlawful, unconstitutional, or illegal.
All right.
We expect when the federal government will determine that situations have improved,